Recently, I've been playing a game called Pokédoku before I go to bed. It's a trivia game that gives you certain qualities and categories and challenges you to figure out which Pokemon fit the criteria. It's fun, but I've been playing for a couple of weeks and I've yet to win a single round, which has gotten me thinking about just how far Pokemon has fallen in my priority list in recent years. Like most kids in the mid-2000s, Pokemon was once my entire personality, but whenever I look at the most common answers to the daily puzzle, I'm faced with Pokemon I've never even heard of. The obvious implication here is just that I'm a man in my early 20s falling out of love with my childhood hobbies, and that's certainly part of it. But a quick look at the videos tab of this channel will confirm that most of my interests haven't exactly matured. My other biggest childhood obsession, Star Wars, is a staple on this channel, and I spend an inappropriate amount of time playing many of the video games I loved so much as a kid. And it's not like I don't want to play Pokemon anymore. I find myself thinking, hey, I should probably get back into Pokemon fairly often, either starting up a new save file on one of my old games or buying the occasional pack of cards, but it never really goes any further than that. And I'm beginning to suspect that this is more of an indication of the changes Pokemon has gone through over the years than an indication that I've finally matured a bit. The most obvious change in recent memory has been the move to 3D, leaving behind the sprite-based graphics Pokemon was once famous for in exchange for a slightly more modern look. From a purely visual perspective, I don't think this change has been executed very well, with washed out colors, mediocre models, questionable animation quality, and just a general lack of the charm present in so much of old Pokemon art, but those issues are all entirely subjective. The much bigger problem lies in the technical issues that have accompanied the change in visual style. Almost every Pokemon game since X and Y has been absolutely plagued by low frame rates, and several games have suffered from far more significant issues, with assets popping in as you walk, low resolution textures, and a multitude of bugs that leave many Pokemon games looking several generations out of date. This has resulted in a pretty unique phenomenon where Pokemon fans have begun to beg for fewer games. I've recently seen genuine excitement over the relatively slow news cycle accompanying the next release, and it's clear that Pokemon fans understand that no matter how you feel about the newer Pokemon games, they would all benefit from a little more time in the oven. It's no secret that sprite-based games with fewer animations are quicker to develop than games that use a lot of 3D assets, and Game Freak's unwillingness to slow down their development cycle accordingly is responsible for most of the issues the newer games face, including the recent trend of leaving some Pokemon out of certain games entirely. That's not to say that Pokemon hasn't changed pretty dramatically in other ways, and I think this is best exemplified by a design trend that I personally find infuriating. Why do they keep standing up? I've definitely seen some jokes about how simplistic many of the early Pokemon designs are, with many just being stylized versions of real-life animals with some sort of elemental power tacked on, but that was a critical design choice. The elevator pitch for Pokemon has always been about capturing the feeling of being a little kid stepping into a big world, a small recreation of the feeling the creator of Pokemon got catching bugs in the local woods and streams as a kid. To recreate that feeling of being in the natural world, Pokemon have to be plausible not as characters, but as species. It's the difference between Pikachu, the species, and Pikachu Libre, the character. An individual Pikachu that likes dressing up and wrestling is neat, but imagine if there was an entire species that was just an awkward wrestling caricature. Oh. Or a spy? Or a soccer player? A witch? A ninja? It's not that these designs are objectively bad, in fact I like some of them, but they're a really strong indicator of just how much Pokemon's focus has changed. That change in focus away from the natural world is also evident in the way that newer regions are presented. The Pokemon themselves were never the only way older Pokemon games sold the idea of being out in nature, and a lot of that came down to route design. Most of Pokemon's finest moments come not in towns, but in iconic routes. Caves, forests, and yes, water. But while earlier Pokemon games might not have actually been larger in scale than the newer titles, the sprite-based graphics were better at communicating a sense of scale, and the games took great care to give the illusion of choice, often making your journey feel much less linear than it actually was. The feeling of isolation you get from being surrounded on all sides by nothing but wild Pokemon and hostile trainers is absolutely critical to the experience, and it's a feeling that you just can't get when routes are so short and linear that you can often literally see the next town on the horizon. It's also not a feeling that you can get when the game won't allow you to lose. I completely understand that Pokemon is a children's franchise, and making these games accessible for young kids is not just understandable, it's the whole point. But as an older fan who can't let go, the most formative memory I have of playing Pokemon post-Generation 5 is probably my unfortunate experience playing the Diamond and Pearl remakes. I hadn't played a Pokemon game in years, and things started off shaky. The game was $60 and profoundly ugly, but I powered through the first couple hours since I was so eager for a chance to play through Generation 4 again. I was excited to finally see the following mechanic from Heart Gold and Soul Silver make a return, but my Pokemon did such a poor job actually following me that I eventually just turned it off and kept on going. It wasn't really until I hit the 4th gym that I truly lost my patience. I had been intentionally underleveling my Pokemon in an attempt to make the game a little more challenging, and as my final 2 Pokemon reached low HP, I allowed myself to feel some genuine excitement for the first time since I had started the game. I might actually lose a battle and find myself faced with the genuine challenge I'd been hoping for. I sent in the weaker of my 2 Pokemon, which I believe was a Zubat, and I knew it was going to get one shot, so I used a potion on my Torterra, but my Zubat resisted the hit since he apparently loved me so much, and I got a chance to fill up the rest of my Torterra's health bar with a second potion. Finally, Zubat, rest in peace, was knocked out, and I sent out my final Pokemon. Things were looking rough, but to make a long story short, my Torterra also resisted the knockout blow. I won the battle, I closed the game, and I never played again. Now again, I understand. I'm complaining about a children's franchise being too easy for me. But turn-based combat like this is the easiest possible genre to introduce difficulty settings into. Pump the levels up a little bit, maybe tweak a couple of movesets here and there if you're feeling generous, and add in a toggle for some of the features that lower the difficulty, like that Pokemon friendship system or party-wide XP share, and the whole problem goes away overnight, with significantly less work than it would take to fix any of the other more foundational problems I've complained about. But Game Freak doesn't do any of this, and with each passing generation, the problems seem to get worse, not better. The resulting product ends up coming off as a yearly cash grab rather than the passion project Pokemon once was, and the decision to start charging players exorbitant fees for post-game content is not helping that image. Pokemon games don't look good. They aren't mechanically challenging, and they don't run well. But above all else, Pokemon has kinda lost its heart, becoming just another formulaic game series that pops out half-baked every 12 months or so. And the worst part is that the rest of the franchise is still thriving. While I was working at a card shop a year or so ago, I had a brief stint playing the TCG and found it to be quite fun both to play and to collect. Many of the newer Pokemon designs have become massively popular, and even some of the video games outside of the main series games have been quite successful. And while Pokemon stagnates, other games prove that there's still an impossibly high demand for innovation. Most recently, Palworld got some time in the sun, boasting incredibly high concurrent player counts and getting a decent amount of publicity despite being a relatively low budget and, let's be honest, relatively poorly made survival game completely absent from any of Pokemon's popular designs. And really that's the issue. The demand for Pokemon is so high that even imitators and the worst of the actual Pokemon games break sales records, shoveling in record profits with minimal investment. Sure, a game with the amount of care other Nintendo properties get could completely revitalize the series, both bringing it to new audiences and to older players like me that may have left the series behind, but why bother if you can just release slop and sell 1 billion copies? The series that once put an entire extra region into the game just because they could has become diluted and formulaic, and I've begun to wonder just how long it'll be until I see another Pokemon game that does the series justice.